everyone. In today's video, we're going to finally see the nail art that is applied on top of this crazy long nail. First, we saw how we put on the nail form, video below. Then we saw how we sculpted the background and painted the background, video below. And now we get to see the Maleficent dragon nail, which is so cool. This one just has so much art built into it, just from the shape of the dragon and the shape of Maleficent and how they kind of interlock together. I love it so, so much. I hope you guys like it as much as I do, and don't forget to click subscribe to see all my future videos as well.
So I'm going to begin with my dragon, but I do want to mention sometimes people ask me if I ever make mistakes, and you will see later in this video that I had to remove some stuff and I fixed it. So if you are ever like, I wonder if there's ever mistakes that are made, or how do you fix a mistake if it happens, definitely keep watching, because you will see that A, I definitely do make mistakes. Usually they don't actually get all the way to the nail. I stop them before that, and B, how to fix them if that does happen. And there's actually a few different mistakes that came up with Maleficent. So if that is something that ever crosses your mind, I will happily show you some of those little oopsies. So we've got our dragon's face, and unfortunately a lot of this nail is sculpted with black, both for the dragon and for Maleficent. So that doesn't look nearly as exciting on the video as I wish it would. But I'm going to use a combination of my brush and a silicone tool. I'm using a cone-shaped silicone tool to help with all of those little details on my dragon's face. I added a little indent on the inside of the mouth for like where the tongue would go, added some details on the eyes, the nostrils, and then I'm going to continue the body right down to the tip of the nail. I don't want to make the very base of the dragon, so like where it goes right to the tip of the nail, the bottom part that you see, very thick as far as the acrylic goes up and down, because that's going to make the tip of the nail look a little bit more, a little thicker, a little less sleek and dangerous. So that's kind of the idea with this particular shape of nail and with this design, is that that point should stay super crisp, because it's going to add to that danger and intrigue and, threat that Maleficent presents. I'm going to continue doing all of the details going back up to the top of my dragon, and I'm going to be adding the horns, just like Maleficent. Maleficent as a dragon also has the horns, so I'm going to be throwing in the horns. So as far as like the art styling goes with this, I kind of wanted to combine the realism from the live action with the nostalgia and just the childhood love from the original movie. So all over this, you're going to kind of see a hybrid of the way that it looks. So I've got a whole bunch of little spikes that I'm going to be sculpting on a nail form backing. These are going to go down the dragon's, like the back of her neck. So I'm going to just make a bunch of these. They don't need to all be the exact same size or the same thickness. In fact, vary them a little bit so that you can layer them and put them in order so that they do get progressively larger as they go down, just so that there's a little bit more movement. If they're all completely identical, they're going to look a bit cookie cutter. So actually having them be slightly varied is a good thing. Keep adding them. They can get to be very, very small. They can be very thin. The one thing is with this nail and any of them that are similar to this is I know it's going to be impractical to wear. I'm not trying to make it practical to wear, so I don't mind if these pieces are very thin and very delicate. I just know that as I'm working on it, I must be careful. Now with a very neon yellow, I'm going to be doing a couple things that are remaining. I'm going to be adding a little like tendril of smoky fieriness coming out of her mouth. So that is what this is. I've got that really neon yellow and a really bright, bright orange. Now with some nail glue, I'm going to take and I'm going to glue each of these little spikies down her back. If you press them or you put them farther onto her back, they're going to be shorter. So you can control the length to an extent at this point with how you glue them on to her back. Keep adding them going down. Sometimes nail glue doesn't want to cooperate. If that's the case, just be patient. Eventually it'll work. And then the same process, I'm going to glue that tongue into her mouth and secure it with a little bit more of the orange. If you were to sculpt that directly on the nail, the orange and the yellow would not look nearly as bright, because they would be completely stuck down to the nail, and the color, the black from underneath, would show through, and it wouldn't be anywhere near as vibrant as if you sculpt it separately and add it on. Plus her tongue does extend past the side of the nail, so that's also a good reason. But if it didn't, I would still sculpt that piece separately and then attach it, just so that it shows up as a little bit more neon. I'm going to smooth out the section over the top of those little back spikes with more black acrylic, and I'm going to create a little ledge right kind of from the corner of the jaw going down, so it splits the neck about in half. I'm creating a ledge almost like you're doing a reverse French tip. And then still with my black acrylic, I'm going to sculpt kind of just the arm bone, the thicker, meatier part, the shoulder of the wing coming out the back. Now with a purple, I'm going to brush that in the section that does not have the second layer of black acrylic to the neck and chest. This is the area that is more towards our face, facing forward. And then I'm going to add another layer of purple. This is a darker shade going over the top. I'm going to kind of blend these out to continue that almost smoky look, very similar to what's on the background. Background is so pretty. If you did miss any of those videos of sculpting the base of the nail, adding the form, painting the background, I would recommend watching those. They are in the description box below, as I mentioned earlier. But again, if you missed them, go check that out. So now you see that big spot where there's supposed to be black paint and it's missing? That's my first little oopsie. So that spot where I just applied a bead of acrylic directly on top of, that is a spot where I had started sculpting Maleficent's face, and then I looked at it and I thought, ew, this is not what I meant to do. This doesn't look right. Not quite in such a Valley Girl style, but that was kind of the thought that went through my head. I was just like, no, this is not it. This is wrong. So before the acrylic was fully set, I popped it off. And to pop it off, I just took a cuticle pusher and I pushed it right off. Unfortunately, it did grab some of my gel polish and it did pull that off as well. However, because I am sculpting right on top of it, it didn't really matter if it took off some of the gel polish. I just knew that I wouldn't be able to get it off a second time because now it's attached to acrylic underneath and it would be completely, fully, irrevocably stuck. So if something like that does happen, if you see a mistake and you're like, ooh, is this worth trying to save? And you decide no, remove it immediately. Do not wait. If you do wait and you can't just pop it off or push it off with a cuticle pusher, then your next option is going to be to file to remove it, which could very well mess with a little bit more of your art depending on the situation and the circumstance. So anytime you see a mistake, I love to just take care of it immediately. And I have done that in other videos, and usually it doesn't take off anything from the background. So this was like oh, look at that. You decided to take my background with you. But it's okay because it gets covered up and nobody needs to know, except for you guys get to know because you need to see these things. So now, after we have that, I also have the black going around the head part of her headpiece. So not the horns going up, but I'm going to be sculpting my horns with black acrylic on a nail form backing, as well as a skinny little piece that is going to be for each side of the collar. She's got the flared collar, so you need to do 2 little triangles for that collar. Very, very similar to the dragon for the back of the neck. Kind of a similar situation. There's actually 2 of those little points on the side, the shoulder that's like facing us more. You get to see 2 instead of just 1. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to glue on my horn. I'm going to set it down and then I'm just going to attach it with acrylic. Now this is where you guys are going to see mistake numero dos. I was having the hardest time getting these horns oriented where they are in the right spot. The great thing is you can adjust them and move them, and hopefully if you don't attach them down too well, you'll be able to just pop them off, which is what I did. Here I'm just going to grab and I'm going to rip it off and I'm going to turn it around because I put it on backwards, and I actually sculpted it backwards too. Some of those, do you guys ever have one of those days where you're just like, what on earth? Everything I do is upside down or backwards or crooked. This was one of those moments, and it was just dealing with Maleficent and her face structure. She is one of the most interesting characters because there are so many little line rules. There's so many angles that are not found in normal human anatomy that you don't sculpt or paint or do unless you are painting her specifically. And if you mess them up and you get them wrong in any sort of way, it just looks very wrong. And that is what I was going with. And sometimes those days, if you have one of those days, and I think everybody has one of those days, if that is the case, you can either kind of do what I do, and usually I'll just laugh it off and I'll fix it. And typically I catch these things right away. So it's not like I'll finish a project and then notice that something's crooked. Hopefully that's the case for you as well. Or there are days where I can feel like I'm like, oh, you know what? I am too tired. This is not going to be a good night for me. Everything I try to make is not going to turn out and I will be crabby about it. Then the best thing to do, the most difficult thing, but the best thing is going to be to not do art that day, or not do art of the caliber of something like this. So instead, if you're just like, oh, I really have that itch to create something, but I just know that I'm going to end up frustrated if I try to do something that is, on a difficult thing that's going to expand my skill set, maybe go ahead and choose something that's a little bit more commonplace for you. Something that you do a lot of. If you still need to get that, you still have that itch to make something. Obviously, if you have that, you need to do it or you won't sleep if you're like me, but do something else possibly. One thing that I like to do if I am in that situation and I am tired and I know that, I really need to rest, but I need to get something creative, done before then, is I will prepare future artwork. I will do research on reference photos. I will brainstorm. And sometimes that is the best thing because you are doing something artsy. It's getting that creative, power going in your brain, but it isn't something where your hands need to be making something small and detailed and correct. So sometimes that is a great sort of a consolation prize, if you will, to those days when art is just difficult for you. I'm going to be adding the same shade of purple to Maleficent down her front, kind of in like the middle of her dress collar cloak. I don't know what that really is. I guess cloak seems like the right word. The center of her cloak, the lapels of her cloak, have that same light purple as the color that is on the front of the dragon. And then going back to her face, I'm going to be sculpting in some of those facial feature details. Just like with the horns, there are very angular shapes that are happening on her face. Luckily, these ones are very closely related to a standard human anatomy, so it's a little bit more, if you have sculpted people before, then this is not nearly so abstract as getting those horns in just the right spot. I'm going to add some thickness and some drama to her brow bone, to her chin, and to her cheekbones first. That gives me a really nice frame to add her nose. I personally do not really love sculpting noses, or painting noses for that matter. I think that's a common thing for people. Noses are just kind of a particular thing. So I like to do stuff around the nose first to really get the placement perfect. I find if I just go straight to the nose and then I try to add in the cheekbones, brow bone, etc. around it, the nose ends up in the wrong spot because I don't have those other things to frame it. So I like to start in, everything but the nose and then go to the nose. After I have the nose, I do like to do the eyes. So I have kind of a normal order of events when I do sculpt a face like this. I typically will start with the forehead and then the cheekbones and then the chin, kind of go forehead and work my way down, and then nose and then eyes. And then if I do have the crazy idea to sculpt lips, which I typically don't because I feel like that's another one of those things where whenever I try to sculpt the lips, it's wrong and I'm better off just painting them. The last thing I will do is the lips, which obviously here we go. I say I shouldn't do it and then I always do it. I feel like this is a circumstance where if I keep doing it, it's, each time it gets a little bit better. So of course, keep doing it. I feel like a lot of times when I sculpt lips, it ends up looking like a weird mustache. Usually by the time things are painted though, it all works out, but definitely that initial instinct is, yep, that looks like a mustache every time. So I'm going to blend those in. I actually feel like with Maleficent, her lips went way better than what my typical experience is. Going to smooth out her nose just a little bit more. This color that I'm using for her is a very, very light kind of nude beige color, but because she is more green, I know in the live action movie she is that shade of kind of gray beige, but I do want to bring in ties from both original and new, so I'm going to be just washing over her face with some green acrylic. So that will give it that green hue without being solid green. It's just kind of like a hint of green. Going to touch up the black of her headpiece with more black acrylic. If there's any little edges that don't look quite perfect, you can also fix those with black acrylic paint later as well if the acrylic seems like it would just be too thick if you were to add more to it. Now, I know sometimes with those things, especially with a little bit of black, it's hard to just straighten out a line or something with black acrylic because black acrylic isn't as stretchy as the other colors. There's so much pigment built into it that it doesn't move quite the same way. It seems like it doesn't matter what brand it is, just the way that it has to be. So sometimes if you want to smooth a line out and you are working with black, just go through with paint later because it is an easier experience. I'm going to add a second coat to a couple of the areas, just go over until I'm happy with it. Now is the fun part. This is like really the satisfying, oh my goodness, I can't believe I created this masterpiece moment. I'm going to be doing all of my detailing, all my shading, all my everything with acrylic paint. So if you are thinking acrylic paint, I mention this in a lot of my videos. If you want to know the time to use acrylic paint versus gel polish, I do have a live video that I went through all the different times, the use cases, and the best case scenarios for when to use acrylic paint, when to use gel polish or gel paint, which should hopefully really help you out. So if you are curious about that video specifically, I will put a link to it in the description box below. It does have a lot of information packed into it. So if you are a nail enthusiast and you like to know the best option, your best medium for the job, definitely check that video out if you haven't already. On Miss Maleficent, I'm going to use some gray to do some highlighting on her horns, on her collar of the black little collar. I'm going to do some white highlights. This is that lovely mix of kind of cartoon and realism. It's one of my favorite styles actually for nail art in this way. I love it when it's like there's real details, there's actual shading that's built in, but yet there's still some outlines and it's still kind of funky. So that's what we're doing. I'm also going to use some purple to highlight one edge of her. I will do that same kind of some purple outlining on the dragon as well when I get to it, but that will give it more of a pop art kind of a look. It'll give it more of a glow too, and it'll make it stand out from the background and just stand out in photographs and visually no matter what. Adding that little pop of color on one side, which is the purple, and the little white highlight on the other side does a lot. With diluted black paint, I'm going to start doing a lot of my shadowing and my detailing on Maleficent's face. If you were doing this on somebody that you wanted to look very alive and healthy, don't do the shading with straight black paint. I would do it with a dark brown or a color that just seemed more appropriate. However, we don't necessarily want her to look alive and well, so black is perfect. When I dilute my black paint, a lot of times I will dip my paintbrush into my acrylic paint. This is any color, it doesn't just have to be black. And then I'll dip my brush into my water cup and then mix it together so that I really thin out that black paint. That gives my little black lines a lot more fluidity and a lot more just control. I feel like, if you're painting a bigger canvas, you don't want your paint to be very thin because it will get out of control, because there'll be so much liquid that if you paint any space at all, it's going to drip down your canvas. Well, we have a teeny tiny little spot here that we're painting. And so if our paint is too thick, our lines will have to be thicker because it's just what the paint is going to require. But if you thin your paint out and you paint skinny little lines with a thinner paint, you will have a lot more control and everything will just go much smoother. You're going to need to, with more pigmented paint, do her eyebrows, outline her eyes, add some yellow paint inside her eyes. I'm going to give her her purple eyeshadow. Oh, it's so fancy. Same thing on the other side. Some of this drama, this, makeup styling on Maleficent and Ursula, seems like those are like the two to me that I'm just like, oh, you guys are so glamorous. I love adding that. I'm going to do some shading on the eyeshadow as well, darkening the corners, adding a little bit of a much brighter, very light purple right in the center. Brings so much detail. Oh my goodness. And then add a little bit more, touch up some of those black lines, add her pupil, add a little reflection in her eye, a little more outlining on her crease of her eyelid. Do some outlines and some highlighting on her face. You can use white, you can use a brighter shade of green. Don't use anything pink toned. Again, we're not trying to make her look lively. We're trying to make her look kind of mischievous and dead, sort of. So here we are. The only thing that you are going to want to add sort of that warm tone to is going to be those lips. After you do have her lips painted in, both upper and lower, her face is, it's right on the edge of being done. Her lips aren't completely detailed yet because they're all one lip, but if you separate them out, highlight them if you want to, it doesn't take too much, and whew, there she is. Man, she's so gorgeous. This is one of those things that, because I was having some technical difficulties, as you all saw, once you get to this point where you see it all coming together, it is such a satisfying moment. It is so encouraging, and it just makes you want to create more. So I hope that if you ever have the same kind of situation like I was in, and you're just having one of those days, you keep with it, you stick with it, and that project that you are working on, because it is so worth it in the end. Add those final little highlights to Maleficent on her body, and then I'm going to move on to the dragon. For the dragon, the process is going to be extremely similar to the process that you used for painting Maleficent as far as like the color palette goes, the process goes. It's all going to basically be the same. So I'm going to highlight all of the black of the dragon with diluted white paint or diluted gray paint to brighten it up, to bring it forward. And then after I have all of those very soft highlights in, where it's smooth little blended areas, I'm going to go through with my white and my purple, and I'm going to be adding the rest of those highlights, those little outlines on the very edges that make everything just so bright. I'm going to be adding some black lines as well in here, so like I did that across the horns of the dragon, just as I did across the horns on Maleficent. I'm going to be adding some black outlining down that very center, like belly panel, so that area that's purple down the front. Adding those black lines, separating out each of those sections, kind of snake-like belly, and then some little white highlights going across the same spaces. Then my purple, go through, add lots of purple. I wanted this to have so much color within it, within my monochrome palette, but have that brightness still mixed in. Highlight across the white tongue. Just keep going through. You'll see the spaces as you're looking at it and as you're slowly examining each section as you're painting it. Hopefully all of the places that need a little bit more pizzazz will just show themselves to you. I'm going to add the final little bits of detail to the wing. Once you are pretty much satisfied with all of the art, give it a full look over everywhere, look at Maleficent, look at the dragon, look at every spot, just to make sure you're happy with it. If you have any other final little highlights to add, go ahead and do that. I'm going to add a bit more glam to her face, and then I'm going to apply some matte top coat over practically everything, all the 3D art pretty much, except for I'm not really going to bother with her horns, but everything else is going to get some matte top coat. This is regular lacquer top coat, not a gel. After that has dried completely, you can feel it, touch it, nothing is going to be tacky anymore. I'm going to grab some of my favorite builder gel, and I'm going to add a 3D section to each little bit of horn. So I'm going to start with Maleficent, and I'm going to fill in those little areas. After I have each one filled in with that, I'm going to flash cure it. If you do not flash cure it, all of these sections will run together. This is a very similar process as doing a like a unicorn horn nail or a seashell textured nail, where you do a stripe, you do a spot, and then you flash cure it so that it stays right where you put it. This is such a beautiful effect, and it makes those horns look so glassy and just so beautiful and 3D, a little bit more textured in 3D. So that also adds a really cool little touch. I'm just going to go through and do every single spot. The more body your gel has, the more thickness, the more viscosity that it has, the thicker these little sections are. If you wanted them to be more dramatic in the bumps, use a sculpture gel or a thicker gel. The one that I'm using is a self-leveling builder gel. So that means that it's going to, as soon as I apply it, I kind of put the gel right in the middle. I let it flow out to the edges, and then I flash cure it. If you use something that doesn't have quite that behavior, you're going to need to adjust your technique a little bit to get the same smooth effect. I would recommend using this type of a gel. I just feel like it creates enough of a bumpy texture. It doesn't, it's not super over the top, but it's definitely, that texture is there without having to, fiddle with smoothing it out. After I have all of those sections on Maleficent's horns done, I'm also going to be adding a little bit of this texture to the dragon's belly. So those purple sections going all the way down, I'm going to do the same process, take my time, do each one individually, make sure that they all get flash cured on my way down. When you're doing something like this, I did mention this in my Italian tile video a little while back, paint the entire section with a thin coat of the gel, and then you're going to bubble it in the middle. So you cover that square, that area, with a thin layer of the gel and then re-layer it down the middle. You see how I did that? That's what is going to give you that smooth shape. You can't just plop the gel right in the center and then expect it to fill in the area perfectly. So you have to give it that border. So you fill in all the areas you want the gel to be. Then when you put that next little drop in the center, it will level itself out within that space. On the dragon, I did go back and forth, and I did like every other one, so I wasn't working on two right next to each other. That does help with the flash curing, just because those are a little smaller and a little tighter together, so that you don't necessarily have to flash cure each one quite as long, because it'll get more curing when you flash cure the next one and you're not working right next to it. So it kind of gives you a little more work time. And I'm going to cleanse that area very well with some isopropyl alcohol, get rid of all of that inhibition layer. Depending on the kind of gel you use, some of like the puffy gels on the market do not have an inhibition layer. So if that's the case, then you can just skip that part. Mine does. So because of that, I did cleanse it. And now just to really up that shine element, I'm going to brush a very thin coat of gel top coat over all of those areas that I just added my bumpy gel to. If you are using one of those that doesn't have that tacky layer, that inhibition layer, then you wouldn't have to top coat it either. But while I'm at it, I'm going to apply just a smidge of top coat to other areas I want shiny, like everybody's eyes and lips. And that's it. Oh my goodness, this is like a several days work culminated into a final video. I absolutely love it. I think it is just so dramatic. I love Disney villains. I have so many other Disney villain videos on my channel, so if you are curious about any of them, definitely check them out in the description box below, because I will list a whole bunch of them. Thank you for sticking with this video till the end. I know it's a long one, and I will see you all next time. Bye!